His fingertips didn't rush. They traced, measured, waited. Like he wasn't trying to take anything, only teach my body how not to flinch. The sheets tangled around my legs, half forgotten. The air between us was warm, still, and full of something I couldn't name yet. Something slow, deliberate, inevitable. He didn't kiss me like a man in love. He kissed me like a man teaching me how to breathe in a world that would never be gentle. And I let him. One night didn't change. Me. But the way he looked at me, like I might be worth the patience. That was the beginning. I didn't cry when I left. I thought I might. I expected to, but I didn't. The hallway was dark, lit only by the dim sconces that flickered with that golden, tired glow I'd come to recognize in this house. A house too big for its own warmth. My bare feet touched cold marble with each step. The silk hem of my robe brushed the back of my calves. I moved slowly, not because I was afraid someone would stop me, but because I hoped, irrationally, that he might. He didn't. The suitcase I kept hidden in the back of the linen closet was already packed, just a few clothes, an envelope of cash, and my mother's brooch sewn into the lining of an old scarf. I hadn't planned to leave tonight, but the truth, once heard, doesn't unring itself. She's just a responsibility. His voice wasn't cruel. That was the worst part. It was calm, measured, the same tone he used to dismiss a meeting or order tea. I'd paused outside the study. The door wasn't closed all the way. I hadn't meant to listen, but I did, and now I couldn't unknow it. Inside that room, he was speaking to someone on the phone. I never found out who. Maybe his lawyer. Maybe his brother. It didn't matter. I stood there for 10 seconds, maybe 12. Long enough to feel my heart twist in on itself, but not long enough to let it shatter where he might hear it. I had thought last night meant something. We'd never shared a bed before. Not really. Our marriage, arranged, practical, clean, was never meant to become intimate. He made that clear the day I signed the agreement. This isn't about love, he'd said. It's about balance. You get what your mother needs. I get what my board wants. We keep each other out of trouble. I should have believed him. I did, at first. But months pass slowly in a house like that. Every room echoes. Every dinner in silence is a performance in restraint. And eventually, loneliness convinces you of things you shouldn't believe. Then came the storm. The power went out just past midnight. Wind howled through the rafters like something ancient and grieving. I couldn't sleep. I lit candles, wandered the halls, found him in the parlor, kneeling by the fireplace, coaxing flame from half-wet logs. His right hand was burned. Not badly, but enough for him to wince as I reached for it. "I'm fine," he said, but he didn't pull away when I held his wrist. We didn't talk much, just sat by the fire as it caught, shoulder to shoulder, sharing silence that, for once, didn't feel empty. He didn't touch me that night to claim me. He simply wrapped a blanket around both our bodies and fell asleep. It wasn't passion. It wasn't even comfort. It was presence. And to me, that was enough to believe in. Until it wasn't. I left the ring on the kitchen counter, next to the still steaming cup of chamomile I'd made him 2 hours before. He hadn't touched it. Funny. For weeks I'd imagined this exact moment in 1,000 worse ways. Yelling, begging, slamming doors. And here I was, leaving so quietly, even the walls seemed surprised. The taxi idled in the snow. The driver didn't say a word as he loaded my case. I climbed in, clutching my coat around me, letting my breath fog the window as I looked back once, just once, at the place I had tried to make into something like a home. It wasn't cold that made me shiver. It was clarity. When Graham Easton asked me to marry him, no, correction, When he accepted my offer to marry him, I told myself I was choosing agency. That helping my mother get the medical care she needed in exchange for 1 year of my life wasn't sacrifice, it was logic, honor even. I didn't need his affection, I didn't need his warmth. Just a roof, a signature, and enough dignity left to stand on. But somewhere between the paperwork and the quiet dinners, I started hoping. Maybe I could thaw him. Maybe kindness, patience, devotion, maybe all of that could melt his restraint. It's a funny thing, the way women are taught to believe that love can be earned by being good enough. I wasn't good enough. Not because I failed, but because that was never the bargain. The car pulled away. The tires whispered across the snow like someone saying goodbye too softly to be heard. I didn't turn back again. I didn't need to. Inside the house I had just left. The man I married was likely still in his study, still thinking, still measuring, still sorting people into categories, assets, liabilities, responsibilities. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even heartbroken, just empty. And sometimes, emptiness is the clearest kind of truth. He didn't choose me. And tonight, for the first time, I chose myself. But somewhere, deep beneath the steel I was wrapping around my spine, a voice whispered, "This isn't the end. You'll come back. But not because he calls you. You'll come back when you're ready to stay on your own terms. And when that day comes, he won't be the one who gets to decide." I met Graham Easton for the second time in my life on a Tuesday morning, with my mother's medical chart in my bag and my pride crumpled in my coat pocket like an old grocery list. The first time was a decade earlier. I was 13, and he was the man who paid off our mortgage when my father died. He didn't come in person, just sent a lawyer and a typed letter. My mother cried for a week, not because she was grateful, but because she didn't know how to say thank you to someone she'd never met. We never heard from him again, until I went to find him. The Easton Tower in Burlington wasn't as tall as I expected. For a man who controlled 8 corporations and sat on 3 charity boards, the building was surprisingly unremarkable. But his office was not. It was glass and steel and silence. The kind of place where words didn't echo, because they didn't dare repeat themselves. He stood when I entered, tall, impossibly still, his suit charcoal, his eyes colorless in that winter light. Claire Bennett. "Mr. Easton, thank you for agreeing to see me." He didn't offer his hand, just gestured toward the chair across from his desk. I sat. I didn't tell him how fast my heart was beating, or how rehearsed my speech was. I'd practiced in the mirror for days, tightening every word until it didn't sound like begging. "My mother is sick. Her kidneys are failing. She needs treatment. It's not covered." "You have insurance?" "Not enough." "You came here for help. It wasn't a question." I nodded. "I came here because you helped her once. I hoped maybe you would again." He studied me for a long time. Not leering, not judging, just assessing. Like I was a figure in a spreadsheet he couldn't balance. "What would you offer in return?" That was the moment I could have left, could have thanked him for his time, swallowed my shame, and walked away with nothing but self-respect and a list of government aid programs that would arrive too late. Instead, I said it. "I'll marry you." The silence that followed was colder than the wind outside. He didn't laugh, didn't blink. "You're offering me marriage. I know how that sounds." "Do you?" I nodded, slowly. "Your board's been pressuring you for stability. Public image. The next phase. You've refused to settle down. A wife would help. And you?" "I need money. She needs time. This buys both." For a moment, I thought I saw something shift in his expression. Not surprise, but recognition. As if he'd already considered this scenario long before I walked in, and now I was merely saying the quiet part aloud. He leaned back. "You're 23. I know. You've never been married? No. No legal complications? Past debts? Nothing that touches you? Another pause. Then, with surgical clarity, I don't do intimacy. I don't do anniversaries, romantic vacations, or pretend affection at galas. If you sign, you agree to be a name, a presence, a professional placeholder. I swallowed. That's fine. We'll live in the same house but on opposite schedules. You'll have access to accounts for your mother's care, but nothing beyond the agreement. You may leave after 1 year, quietly. No scandal, no interviews. And then, like an afterthought. Are you a virgin? I stiffened. He met my eyes. I don't ask for morality, only predictability. Emotional entanglements ruin arrangements like these. Yes, I said quietly, but I'm not here to trade that. I'm here to trade time. His expression didn't change, but something in his shoulders relaxed. Slightly. Fair. He opened a drawer, took out a document already printed. Either he kept it there for emergencies, or he'd expected this, somehow. Have it notarized. Return it within 72 hours. I stood. My legs ached from tension. My palms were sweating, but my voice, somehow, held. Thank you. He looked up just once before I turned to leave. Claire. Yes? Don't fall in love with me. I won't save you if you do. I remember walking out of that tower with the contract in my hands, and a hollow in my chest that felt like dignity packed into a box too small to hold it. I wasn't sure if I was brave, or just tired of waiting for miracles that never came. That night, I told my mother the money came from a foundation scholarship. I told my little brother I'd gotten a job out of state, and I told myself that signing the papers didn't mean I was weak. It meant I could survive 1 more year. Just 1. A year of holding my breath. A year of dinner plates for 2 that never saw food. A year of being a wife in title only. But deep down, I did what every fool with a soft heart does. I hoped. Not for a fairy tale. Not even for romance. Just for a flicker. A moment. Of being seen. I married him 3 weeks later. No flowers, no ring exchange, no kiss, just pen to paper. Silence, and a single thought echoing in my chest like a dare. He didn't choose me, but maybe, if I stayed long enough, he might. The snow had started falling before sunset. By midnight, it covered the grounds like silence made visible. Every path, every hedge, every window ledge softened by white. I couldn't sleep. Graham had been gone all day. Meetings, I assumed. He never told me. He didn't need to. Our marriage ran on parallel tracks. We occupied the same house but never crossed its rooms at the same time, as if proximity might risk waking something we both agreed to leave dormant. That night, though, something was different. The power went out at 12:13 a.m. I remember the exact time because I was still awake, staring at the ceiling in the guest room that had become mine. A flash of light outside. Then darkness, the kind that swallows sound. I wrapped myself in my robe and stepped into the hallway, guided only by memory and instinct. The entire mansion had fallen into a hush. No hum of heating, no faint buzz from the kitchen appliances. Just snow pressing, against glass and wood, and wind like a whisper through a door someone forgot to close. I didn't expect to find him awake, but I found him in the parlor, crouched in front of the fireplace, sleeves rolled up, coaxing life from a reluctant flame. For a moment I thought of turning back, but something in the slope of his shoulders stopped me. He looked tired. Not the sharp, calculated exhaustion of a man overworked, but something softer, older, as if fatigue had reached bone and refused to leave. "Do you need help?" I asked softly. He didn't look at me, but he didn't say no. "I'm fine," he muttered, adjusting the logs with a fire iron. Then he hissed, just a bit, and drew his hand back quickly. I stepped closer. Burned? It's nothing. Let me see. He didn't argue again. He just held out his right hand like it no longer belonged to him. The skin at the base of his thumb was red, already beginning to swell. I reached for the first cloth I saw, a napkin left from dinner, and pressed it gently against the spot. His hand didn't flinch. We were silent. The fire crackled and finally caught, throwing orange shadows against the stone. For the first time, I saw his face in low light, unguarded, no harsh angles from overhead fluorescence, no sterile boardroom glare, just a man, exhausted, flesh and blood, mortal. You should run it under cold water, I murmured. He looked at me. Not in that sharp way he usually did, assessing, weighing, but with the unspoken confusion of someone not used to being touched without transaction. Then he nodded. Once. I'll live, he said. I know, I replied, but you don't have to do it alone. He sat down on the rug, knees pulled up, one arm draped over the back of a nearby chair. I sat beside him, not close, but not distant either. Close enough to feel the warmth from the fire and the slow, steady beat of being near another human being. Funny, he said quietly, staring into the flames. I own half this state, and still couldn't afford a generator strong enough for this wing. I smiled. You never struck me as someone who tolerated failure. He didn't smile back. But he didn't argue either. I tolerate what's inevitable, he said. There was something in his tone that invited a reply. Not conversation exactly, but participation. So I said the first thing that came to mind. My mom used to say snow was God's way of telling people to hush. He turned slightly, toward me. Hush? Yeah. She'd light a candle, make tea, and tell me the world got too loud sometimes, and snow was his reset button. He didn't respond, but I could tell by the way he tilted his head that he was filing it away, as if it were data, but not the kind that ended in a graph. Minutes passed. Maybe more. The fire crackled. My knees warmed. The robe I wore smelled faintly of cedar and the lavender sachets I kept in the drawer. Then, without looking, Graham reached for the blanket draped over the back of the sofa and tossed one end over. My lap. I won't bite, he said. I know, I whispered. We sat like that. Two people wrapped in silence that wasn't hostile for once. Not transactional, not contractual. Just two forms of loneliness pressing gently against each other. Wondering if touch might mean something without demanding anything in return. His hand didn't touch mine, but the edge of the blanket did. And somehow, that was enough. I must have drifted off. The fire was lower when I blinked awake. He was still there. Eyes closed, head resting back against the chair, breathing steady. He hadn't moved away. He hadn't left me there alone. Carefully, I rose to my feet, pulled the blanket higher over his shoulders, stared at him 1 second longer than I should. Have he looked peaceful, unreadable, human? And I knew as I walked back toward my room that something had changed. Not everything, but enough. I hadn't touched him. And yet, tonight, we had been closer than ever. I didn't know then that the next morning he would pretend it never happened. I didn't know yet that the warmth of that fire would feel like a lie once the light came back. But in that moment, in that quiet flickering now, I believed in the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he had needed someone, and I had been there, not as a wife, not as a name on a contract, just Claire. Just a woman who stayed. By morning, the snow had stopped. The fire in the parlor had burned down to soft embers. The light through the stained glass, windows stretched in long dusty columns across the rug. It felt like waking inside a memory I hadn't lived long enough to forget. Graham was gone. The blanket lay folded over the armchair. Neatly. Precisely. Like a scene reset by someone who didn't want it to look like anyone had been there at all. I stood for a long minute, looking at the empty space where he'd slept beside me just hours before. Not touching, not speaking, just existing. And for a moment last night, that had been enough. Now I wasn't so sure. I found a cup of tea on the kitchen counter. Chamomile. Still faintly warm. No note. No trace of his presence except the faint steam that rose like a sigh that hadn't finished leaving. That was Graham, though. Always present, never reachable. Like a lighthouse I could see, but would never touch. By the time I saw him again, it was afternoon. He was in the library, where the walls smelled of old paper and bergamot and something colder, like order, or the absence of mess. He didn't look up when I stepped in, just turned another page of the morning paper, as if we hadn't fallen asleep inches apart less than 8 hours ago. "Did you sleep?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer at first. Then, eventually, I nodded, waited. Nothing else came. "I left you tea," he added, eyes still on the paper. "I saw." Pause. "Thank you." It was like watching someone slowly close a door they never quite opened. I wanted to ask him why. Why he didn't stay a little longer. Why he didn't say anything when I left the parlor. Why he folded the blanket like it had never been used. But questions like that didn't have places in conversations like ours. Because if I asked, I'd be admitting it mattered. And if he answered, I might not like what he said. So instead I said, "I'll be out this afternoon. Groceries." He nodded. Nothing more. And just like that, the distance returned. Like a familiar coat I never asked to wear but knew how to button up, collar high, hands in pockets, ready to brave the cold. At the store, I found myself wandering slower than usual. Touching fruit I didn't need. Reading labels I didn't care about. Watching older couples choose between soups like it was a small, sacred ritual. I envied them. Not for the romance, but for the simplicity. The choosing. The being chosen. Checkout. The cashier smiled. "Cooking for two?" I blinked. Then smiled back, small. Something like that. When I returned, the house was silent again. Graham wasn't in the library, or the office, or the dining room with its table long, enough for 8, but set for none. I left the groceries in the kitchen and wandered upstairs. Not looking for him, exactly. Just movement. Life. A sign that I hadn't imagined last night. That it wasn't just warmth from a fire and exhaustion from silence. That it had meant something. I passed by his door. It was open. He was inside, sitting on the edge of the bed, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, staring at the floor like it had said something offensive, and he hadn't yet figured out how to reply. He didn't look up. But he spoke. "You're not obligated to check in." "I know," I said softly. A pause. Then, "It's not that I regret it. Last night, my breath caught. It's that I don't know what to do with it." There it was. The sentence I hadn't known I needed, and hated that I did. He wasn't cold. He wasn't cruel. He was stuck. And maybe that was worse. Because I could have handled rejection. I could have survived indifference. But this halfway place between connection and caution, it made me want to scream and whisper at the same time. I stepped into the room. Not close. Just enough. "You don't have to do anything with it," I said. "You don't owe me a reaction." His eyes met mine. "But you want one." A beat passed. "I want you to feel what I felt," I said honestly. "Even if it scared you." He looked away, toward the window. It did. I didn't say anything else. Just left. Not in anger, not in retreat, but because some moments are too raw to press on, and some truths only settle when left untouched for a while. Back in my room, I found the scarf I'd wrapped around my neck the day I moved in, still smelling faintly of lavender and the hope I brought with me. I pulled it over my shoulders and sat by the window. Snow was melting, dripping from the roof like time losing its grip. And in that soft, slow unraveling, I realized something. Last night I'd felt something real. This morning I'd been reminded that real doesn't always mean ready. And Graham Easton, brilliant, broken, beautiful Graham, might never be ready. But for the first time, he hadn't denied what was happening. And maybe that was enough. For now. The first time I saw the letter, it was by accident. I had gone into the study to find a book. Any book, really. Something to distract me from the way silence now seemed to gather around me like dust. It had been 3 days since that night. In the parlor, 2 days since Graham's quiet admission. I don't know what to do with it. Since then, things had fallen back into their rhythm. Controlled, polite, carefully distanced. As if intimacy had been a fever we both endured and quietly decided not to mention. I opened the bottom drawer of the mahogany desk to look for the poetry collection I'd left there weeks ago. And instead, I found the envelope, cream-colored, handwritten, edges worn, as if it had been opened many times but never completely read. It was addressed to Graham Easton, in my mother's handwriting. Froze. For a long minute I didn't touch it, just stared, as if by sheer willpower I could force it to explain its own existence. Then I reached for it. I already knew the shape of my mother's cursive before I read a word. I had watched her write hundreds of grocery lists, birthday cards, gentle reminders, taped to the fridge. There was always a tilt to her F, a softness to her S. Seeing it here, addressed to him, was like hearing her voice in a room she'd never entered. I opened it with hands that didn't feel like mine. Mr. Easton, I am writing, not to express gratitude, but concern. I understand you are considering a marital arrangement with my daughter Claire. I know she has come to you with a proposal, and I will not stand in her way. She is of age. She has always been strong-willed, but she does not understand the cost of being chosen for convenience. And you, I believe, know exactly how much that costs. So I ask only this. If you cannot give her love, give her freedom. Let her walk away with her spirit intact. Do not take what she offers if you cannot honor it. Margaret Bennett, I read it once. Then again, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even accusatory. It was just my mother. Quiet, dignified, clear. And it should have been sent before I signed anything. Before I moved into this house. Before I started telling myself that proximity could grow into affection if I tended it carefully enough. But this wasn't the twist. The twist was in the postmark. It had been delivered. Months ago, and Graham had kept it, not unopened, not discarded. Read, known, ignored. I waited until dinner to confront him. The table was set as always. 2 plates, 2 wine glasses, too much space between them. Graham was already seated when I walked in. He was reviewing a file, probably some new acquisition or board report. I placed the letter gently on top of the file, blocking his view. He looked up, met my eyes, didn't flinch. I found it, I said. A pause. Then calmly, I assumed you would. You read it? Yes. I waited. He didn't speak. You didn't tell me, I said. You didn't say a word. No. My fingers curled against my palm. Why? He leaned back slightly. Not defensive, just composed. In that way he always was when emotions started to seep into the room. Because I knew what she wanted me to say, he replied. And I wasn't ready. To say it, I blinked. She didn't ask you to love me, just to give me the chance to leave before you broke something. His voice was quiet, but firm. And I didn't break you, Claire. That hurt more than anger would have. Because in his mind, silence wasn't cruelty. It was restraint. He didn't think he'd done anything wrong. I sat down slowly. You kept the letter? Yes. Why? He stared at the glass of wine in front of him as if it might answer for him. Because I didn't want to forget that someone saw me clearly. Before you did. That stopped me. It wasn't the answer I expected. You mean my mother? He nodded. She knew what I am, the way I compartmentalize people. How I file them under obligation or problem or safe. And she still trusted me with you. She didn't trust you. She warned you. Graham closed his eyes for a moment. I know. Silence stretched. Then I said what neither of us wanted to admit. I wasn't a person to you when I moved in. I was a strategy. He didn't deny it. But the worst part, I continued, is that I let myself believe you might change. His eyes opened. Slowly. And I did. No, I whispered. You bent. Then you snapped back. We didn't finish dinner. I left the table with the taste of disappointment sharp in my mouth, like metal or rain. Back in my room, I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside my bed, not to bury it, not to forget, but to keep it close. Like a compass I didn't know I'd need. Because something had shifted. I didn't want to leave him. Not yet. But now I knew that staying would no longer be about hope. It would have to be about choice mine, not his. I didn't pack much when I left. Just a small bag, my scarf, and the letter. No dramatic goodbye, no slammed doors. I left a note in the kitchen, folded neatly beside the kettle, where he would see it, but not soon enough to stop me. Taking some time. Don't follow. I'll be safe. Claire. I didn't want to run. I just needed to breathe somewhere that didn't carry the echo of things unsaid. The cabin was my mother's, tucked away 2 hours north on the edge of Lake Arrowhead. A single-story rectangle with drafty windows, creaky floors, and no cell reception, unless you stood on the porch and whispered to the sky. I hadn't been there since her funeral. The moment I stepped inside, it was like her arms wrapped around me again, in the smell of pine and tea, the threadbare quilt on the couch, the quiet hum of a space that never demanded more than I could give. I lit the stove, boiled water, let the silence ask its questions. Why did you stay so long? Why did you think love could grow out of convenience? Why are you still hoping he'll miss you? I didn't answer. Not out loud. But I sat with the questions. Let them settle beside me like companions I hadn't invited, but couldn't ignore. On the second night, I found one of my mother's old journals, tucked behind a box of tea. She hadn't been poetic, just honest. January 3rd. Snow's thick again. Claire's growing fast. Looks more like him every day. She asked me tonight if love always looks like sacrifice. I didn't know how to answer her. Maybe it's not about what we give up. Maybe it's about who stays even when giving up is the easier choice. I read that line 3 times, then closed the book gently, like it might shatter if I looked too long. I stayed 5 days. I chopped wood, brewed coffee, took walks through trails I half remembered from childhood. I didn't cry, but I also didn't smile. I just existed, which for a while felt like enough, until the letter came. On the morning of the 6th day, a car pulled up. I didn't recognize it. It wasn't Graham's. A man in a long wool coat stepped out, holding a thick envelope. His name was Eric, Graham's lawyer. I remembered him from the wedding. Quiet, watchful, the kind of man who noticed more than he said. He didn't try to come inside. Mr. Easton asked me to deliver this personally, he said, handing me the envelope. Is he all right? He's alive, Eric said. Then, after a pause, but I wouldn't say he's all right. Then he left. No questions, no pressure, just a car disappearing down a snow-packed road. I held the envelope for an hour before opening it. Inside wasn't a contract. Not a check. No request. No condition. Just a letter. Written by hand. In Graham's unmistakably exact script. Claire, I've spent most of my life confusing silence with control. I thought that if I stayed quiet, I couldn't be wrong. That if I stayed still, I couldn't hurt anyone. That distance was safety. Then you came in and made everything loud in the quietest ways. You asked nothing. You filled the room without speaking. You changed the temperature just by staying in it. I didn't know what to do with that. I'm not writing to ask you back. I'm not writing to apologize. I'm writing because I realized that for the first time, I missed something before it was gone. You, before you left. I hope the cabin brings you peace. I hope your mother's voice still echoes where it matters. And I hope you know, you were never just a responsibility. Not to me. Graham, I read it once. Then I folded it, pressed it to my chest, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself cry. Not because I forgave him, not because I was ready to go back, but because he had finally said something real. That night, I lit a candle in the cabin window, not as a signal, not as a promise, just a small flicker of truth, that even the coldest winter can hold a little light, and that sometimes, disappearing, isn't about running away. It's about becoming visible to yourself. I returned to the city 2 weeks after the letter, not to see him. Not yet. I had errands, things to do, groceries to buy, a dentist appointment I'd put off 3 times. Life had a way of pushing forward, even when your heart still lived in a cabin 2 hours north. I didn't tell Graham I was back. I didn't have to. He didn't call. He didn't text. But he knew. And he waited. I first saw it on the news, scrolling through a muted TV screen at the pharmacy. Easton Group announces major donation to Renal Care Foundation, $15 million under New Bennett. My fingers paused on the lip balm I was holding. My heart, too. I stared at the screen, at his name, at my mother's, and I knew, instantly, it wasn't a PR move. Graham didn't care about appearances. Never had. He didn't make gestures. He made decisions. And this was one. That night, I walked by the Easton Tower, not to go inside, just to see if the lights were on. They were top floor, corner office, one lamp glowing against the skyline like a promise no one heard but me. I stood there in the snow, arms crossed, breath steaming in the dark. He wasn't chasing me. He was making room for me. And somehow, that was more powerful than anything he could have said. 3 days later, I returned to the boutique I used to work at before the marriage. The owner, Maggie, was folding scarves when I walked in. "Look who remembered how to find us," she said, grinning. I smiled. "Do you still need help on weekends?" She tilted her head. "I thought you were, what's the word? Settled." I shrugged. "Turns out roots don't grow without sunlight." She didn't ask questions, just handed me an apron, like I'd never left. He came on a Sunday. I was sweeping the front step when I saw the car. It wasn't the sleek black one he usually used. Just a silver sedan. Modest, borrowed, unfamiliar. He stepped out wearing a navy coat and no tie. His hair was a little longer. His eyes somehow older. I didn't speak. Neither did he. He stood on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, as if he knew he had no right to come closer. Then, softly, "I didn't know if you'd want to see me." I leaned the broom against the doorframe. "I didn't know either." He nodded, looked down. "But I waited anyway," he said, "in case the answer changed." I stepped off the porch, boots crunching over salt and slush. We stood less than a yard apart, and yet it felt like a lifetime had passed between us. "Why? The fund?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. Because she warned me and I didn't listen. Because she loved you enough to give you away. And I thought, maybe it was time I gave something back. I swallowed hard. It wasn't for me. His voice softened. It was for who made you. That landed. And for the first time, I saw him not as the man who hurt me, but as the man who had learned how not to. He didn't ask to come in. Instead, he held out a small envelope. Not a letter, he said. Just a receipt. I opened it. Inside was a deed. He had transferred the cabin, my mother's, to my name. Officially, irrevocably. I looked up, stunned. You didn't have to. I did. He interrupted gently. Because it never belonged to me. Silence stretched. Not cold, not awkward. Just full. Then he said something I didn't expect. I'm not asking for another chance, Claire. He met my eyes. I'm asking if I can wait near the door, in case you ever open. I stepped forward, just one step. No kiss. No tears. I reached out and touched the edge of his coat. Lightly. Like one tests a fire that no longer burns but still warms. And I said, You're already standing closer than you think. He nodded, backed away, got into the car. He didn't. Ask when we'd talk again. He didn't look back. He drove away slowly, like someone who finally understood that presence isn't about arriving. It's about remaining. That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment with the deed in one hand, and the scarf my mother gave me in the other, and I whispered, to no one and everyone. He waited, Mom, not to win, just to deserve. The second time I chose him, there was no contract, no deadline, no bargain to be made. It was a Thursday, late afternoon. The city was just starting to dip into spring, though snow still lined the sidewalks like a memory that refused to melt. I walked through the gate of the Easton residence, no longer our home, not yet his alone. Just a house made of stone, memory, and silence. The same silence I used to fear. The same silence I now understood. He didn't know I was coming. That mattered to me. That it wasn't prompted, expected, or orchestrated. That I wasn't summoned. That I returned because I wanted to, not because I owed him closure. I carried no suitcase, no ring, only a folded letter. Mine this time. And a warmth in my chest that hadn't been there the first time I crossed this threshold. The butler wasn't home. The housekeeper had the day off. The lights were low. I found him in the garden. He was on his knees in the soil, sleeves rolled up, dirt on his palms, planting something small and green into the earth. He didn't see me at first, and I didn't interrupt. I just stood, watching a man who once lived above all things, now quietly choosing to kneel, hands deep in something that would take months to bloom. Something he might never live to see flower. But still, he planted. And I knew. He had changed. I cleared my throat gently. He looked up, not startled, just surprised in the kind of way that feels like hope trying not to get ahead of itself. Hi, I said. He stood slowly, brushed his hands on his jeans. His eyes scanned me like a familiar book he thought he'd lost, but wasn't sure if he was allowed to read again. You're here, he said, softly. I am. Why? I took a breath, reached into my coat and handed him the letter. This isn't a love letter. This isn't a confession. This is me saying, I see you now, not the man on the news, not the name on my marriage license. You, and I like who you're becoming. I want to be near that man. Not because he needs me. Not because I can fix him. Not because he broke me. But because I think we might be something whole. Even if it's quiet. Even if no one claps for it. I don't need flowers. But if you're still planting them, I'd like to stay long enough to see one grow." He read it all, carefully, twice, then folded the paper and slid it into his jacket. "I'm not good at this," he said quietly. "Neither am I," I replied. We stood there for a moment, in the garden, where spring hadn't quite arrived. Then I walked to him, stood close, not touching. He looked at me. "I never deserved you," he whispered. "I wasn't asking you to, and I may not know how to." "Love you right," he continued, "but I know how to keep trying." I smiled. "That's the only kind that lasts." We didn't kiss. Not right then. Instead, we sat on the garden bench, side by side, his dirt-stained hands inches from mine. He told me he'd been reading the book I left behind in the study. The one with the underlined poems. He pointed to the saplings in front of us. "Peonies," he said. "They take years to bloom properly. Some don't survive their first winter." I looked at him. "And yet, you planted them." He nodded. "Because I wanted something beautiful, even if I might not deserve to see it." Night came slowly. The porch lights blinked on. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of soil and something older, maybe forgiveness, maybe the ache of time passed too quickly. I stayed. We made tea. We sat in the kitchen, where the light was soft and the chairs finally felt used. No grand declarations. No sudden swells of music. Just two people with nothing to prove. At some point, he reached for my hand. This time not cautiously, not asking, just trusting. I let him. And in that stillness, I knew. This was not about falling back in love. It was about choosing love the second time, with eyes open, heart steady, and no illusions left to lose. I slept in the master bedroom that night, not because it had changed, but because I had. And when I woke the next morning, to sunlight slicing across the sheets and the smell of coffee Graham never used to drink, but now made just for me, I whispered a truth I never got to say the first time. This time, I choose you too. Not because I had to, but because now, I wanted to stay. If this story touched something quiet in you, if it reminded you that love can still grow in unexpected soil, then don't forget to give it a like and subscribe for more gentle, powerful journeys like this one. Sometimes, the softest stories stay with us the longest. Thank you for being here.